this edition of Synth Masterclass with computer music, we're going to be looking at the BazilleCM plugin synthesizer to create a phase distortion oscillator bass patch. The interesting thing about this patch is that we're only going to be using a single oscillator and we won't be using a filter. It'll give us the opportunity to explore some of the basics of Oscillator 1 on the BazilleCM and really learn how it works from the ground up. Begin by loading up your DAW with an instance of the BazilleCM plugged in and ready to go. Then move to the display, which is at the top center of the plugin, just above the oscilloscope. And if you click in that area, you will see a drop-down menu. We want to initialize the synthesizer so that we have a blank canvas to begin with. So hit the Init button, which will initialize our patch. When you play the Initialize Patch, it will sound like this. We're actually hearing a sine wave, but we're also hearing some delay, which we want to switch off. So go to the bottom right-hand corner of the plugin, and you'll see the Effects Delay section, and just hit the Off button to deactivate the delay. We're predominantly going to be working with the Oscillator 1 section today, so locate this section just to the left-hand side of the plugin. We're going to begin by adjusting the pitch of the oscillator. You'll see, if you look at the coarse tuning pot, which is just labelled Tune, that currently the pot is all the way to the left-hand side. We're going to nudge this up so that it reads a value of 12 in the upper display. It's worth noting that any time we make an alteration to a pot on the screen, you'll see that value displayed in the upper display, and it's a great way of being a little bit more accurate and exacting with our values. This patch invites a little bit of experimentation and allows us the opportunity to explore Oscillator 1 fully. So moving down the oscillator strip, you'll see that there is a pot which has PD for phase distortion next to it. If you now play your sound and adjust this pot at the same time, we get an interesting effect. Now, it probably won't escape your attention that that sounds very, very similar to the kind of thing that you do with a filter. You may notice that there aren't actually any cables going into the filter section currently because we're not using it. So that effect that we just heard there was exclusively coming from the oscillator section. Now you can experiment at this stage by adjusting both the level of the phase distortion pot, but also changing the waveforms that you have assigned directly below it. You can see that the upper waveform we have selected is a sawtooth, and directly below it we have a duplication of the same waveform again. But you can change this, for example, to a square wave. That gives us a great colour to work with. We're going to emulate the basic signal path of an oscillator with a sub-oscillator, and you can hear that the square wave currently acts much like a sub-oscillator. It presents the appearance of being one octave below the sawtooth, which is providing our fundamental. So having set the secondary waveform to a square wave, then move back to the phase distortion pot and set this to a value of 25. As the BazilleCM is effectively a modular synthesizer, it means that we can create virtual patch points with virtual patch cables. We're going to exploit that by sending envelope 1, which is just below oscillator 1, in the direction of the phase distortion pot. Before we look at the patching itself, make sure that the attack, decay, sustain, release faders are set to attack 0, decay set to 35, sustain set to 0, and release set to 20. You'll see that by default you might already have this patched in. Just in case there's no cable present, just look for the output patch point just to the right of the envelope. When you click and hold on that, you can then drag a cable up to the pot. And we're going into the pot which is right next door to the phase distortion pot. This allows us to then apply a modulation. Once you've made that patch connection, change the modulation amount to a value of 66. This effectively means that we have a modulating envelope which is coming out of envelope 1 heading towards the phase distortion pot. The secondary pot that we're using here is merely applying the modulation amount. This therefore means that we have this sort of filter-esque sound. But once again, notice we're not using a filter. Next, you might just want to increase the volume of this patch, and we can do this by going to the Output 1 section, which is once again just below the oscillator, and change the volume pot to a value of 50. Hopefully this shouldn't be too overbearing. And finally, because we're creating a bass patch here, one of the things we can do is switch this to mono mode. You'll probably find it'll be in polyphonic mode already, so just switch it to mono so you can only play one note at a time, much like a bass synth. The final part of this patch just equates to outboard plugins, such as compression. As the BazilleCM is an overtly digital synthesizer, and unashamedly so, it can sound a little on the harsh side. Therefore, using some analog emulation plugins, such as the LA2 from Universal Audio, or in this case we also have an 1176 plugged in, the two together will really just soften the signal and make it sound immense.